Maya had been waiting for this moment for months. After finishing her studies abroad, she was finally coming home. Her plane touched down smoothly, and as soon as it stopped, she felt her heart beating faster. She was excited, nervous, and happy all at once. She had been away for years, and she missed her parents, her younger brother, and even the streets of her hometown. She thought about the food her mother would cook and the hug she would soon receive. With a small smile on her face, she stood up, took her bag from the overhead compartment, and walked with the other passengers toward the exit. The airport was busy as always, with people rushing in every direction. Some were smiling as they greeted loved ones. Others hurried along as if they had no time to lose. Maya walked slowly, pulling her carry-on behind her. She looked around, enjoying the atmosphere. She was wearing a simple dress and a light jacket, nothing special, but her calm presence drew a few glances. She looked like any normal traveler, but inside she was full of anticipation. As she reached the immigration line, she handed her passport to the officer with a polite smile. The officer scanned it and nodded, letting her through without any questions. Everything seemed normal. She picked up her suitcase from the baggage claim and began walking toward the arrival gate, where her family was supposed to be waiting. She pictured her mother waving and her little brother running toward her. She almost laughed at the thought, her eyes already searching the crowd ahead. But then something unexpected happened. Just as she walked past a group of uniformed police officers near the exit, two of them stepped directly in front of her. They were tall, broad, and their serious faces made her freeze. One of them asked her to stop. At first, she thought it must be a random security check, nothing unusual in a busy airport. She stopped politely and said yes when they asked her name. She expected them to wave her along in a moment. Instead, they suddenly told her to place her hands behind her back. Maya was shocked. She looked at them in confusion, certain she had misheard. "Excuse me?" she asked softly. But before she could say more, one of the officers grabbed her arm and pulled her hands back roughly. The other officer snapped a pair of metal handcuffs around her wrists. The cold bite of the cuff sent a wave of panic through her body. People around them began to slow down, watching the scene. Some stopped completely, their eyes wide. Maya felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She tried to ask what was happening, but her voice came out unsteady. "Why, what did I do?" she asked. The officers ignored her question. One of them told her she was being detained for suspicious activity. The words sounded empty and strange, as if they were said just to justify their actions. Maya tried to stay calm, but fear started building in her chest. She had never been in trouble before. She had always been a good student, respectful, quiet, and hard-working. To be handcuffed in the middle of the airport without explanation felt unreal. Her mind raced, trying to think of anything she might have done wrong. Nothing came to her. She had only stepped off the plane and picked up her bag. The officers began pulling her toward a side area, their grip firm. Maya's suitcase rolled behind awkwardly as she stumbled to keep up. She could feel dozens of eyes following her, and she heard the faint click of phone cameras. Some travelers whispered to each other, some shook their heads, a few even began filming on their phones. The humiliation cut deep, but Maya tried to hold her head high. Inside, though, she was breaking. She thought of her parents waiting outside the gate, expecting to see her walk out with a smile. She imagined their faces if they saw her like this, in handcuffs, being dragged away by police. The thought made her stomach twist. She wished she could send a message, tell them not to worry. But the officers gave her no chance. One of them asked her about her bag, as if expecting to find something hidden. Maya explained it was just clothes and books, but they did not listen. They pulled her along without speaking further, their expressions cold and harsh. She wanted to cry but held it back. She remembered her father's words from long ago. "In difficult moments, stay calm. Do not let fear or anger control you. Your calmness is your strength." Those words echoed in her mind now, and she tried to breathe slowly. She told herself she had nothing to hide. The truth would come out. Still, her heart pounded in her chest and her wrists hurt from the tight cuffs. She wanted to believe it was just a mistake, that someone would soon realize the officers had made an error. But when she looked into their eyes, she saw no sign of doubt, only judgment. As they passed through the crowd, she noticed more people raising their phones, recording everything. A woman whispered loudly, "She didn't even do anything. I saw her walking normally." A man nearby said, "This is wrong. They just grabbed her for no reason." Those voices gave Maya a small sense of hope. Someone was seeing the truth. Someone might help her later. The officers, however, seemed to grow more tense as they noticed the cameras. One of them pulled his cap lower, trying to avoid being recognized. The other spoke sharply, telling the onlookers to step back and mind their business. But the crowd didn't move away. They kept watching, some following as Maya was led toward a closed-off security room near the corner of the terminal. Her mind was full of questions. Why had they chosen her? Was it her skin color? Was it her foreign accent? Did they even have a reason at all? She did not want to believe such things, but deep inside she feared the answer. She had heard stories before, but she never imagined she would be living one. The door to the security room opened and she was pushed inside. The noise of the crowd faded as the door closed, leaving only the officers and Maya in the stark, cold room. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above. Her suitcase was dropped roughly onto the table, and the officers began searching through it without asking her permission. Her neatly folded clothes were thrown aside, her books opened, her small gifts for her family pulled out carelessly. Maya sat on the chair they pointed to, her hands still cuffed behind her. She felt powerless, like her life was not her own in that moment. Every second felt heavy, stretching endlessly. She wanted to scream that she was innocent, but she knew shouting would only make them treat her worse. She chose silence, her father's words still steadying her. Time seemed to slow. She heard the sound of her belongings being tossed around, the officers muttering to each other. Her eyes stared at the floor, her mind racing between fear and determination. Somewhere out there she hoped someone was calling her family. Someone was noticing what was happening. She didn't know it yet, but the cameras in the crowd had already begun spreading her story. And so what began as a joyful homecoming had turned into a nightmare in just a few minutes. Maya sat in that room, her wrists bound, her dignity wounded, but her spirit unbroken. She had no idea what would come next, but deep in her heart, she felt this was not the end of her story. It was only the beginning. Maya sat in the chair with her wrists still cuffed behind her. The room was small and plain, with white walls and a buzzing light overhead. The two officers stood across from her, speaking in low voices. She tried to catch their words, but they mumbled too softly. From time to time, one of them looked at her as if she was already guilty of something terrible. She sat as calmly as she could, though inside she was trembling. The search of her suitcase continued. They opened her books roughly, flipped through pages as if they expected to find something hidden. They shook out her clothes and dropped them in messy piles. A small box of sweets she had brought for her mother fell on the floor and cracked open, spilling pieces everywhere. Maya looked at the broken box, her chest tightening, but she did not say a word. Finally, one of the officers turned to her. His voice was sharp and his tone carried no respect. He asked her where she had come from and why she was here. Maya answered quietly, telling him about her studies abroad and how she was returning home to see her family. The officer narrowed his eyes as though he did not believe her. He asked her again, this time with more pressure, as if her first answer had not been enough. She repeated the same story, her voice steady but soft. The second officer leaned closer to her. He spoke harshly, accusing her of lying. Maya's heart pounded. She had told the truth, but their eyes showed no interest in hearing it. Instead, they seemed eager to find something to hold against her. They asked about her passport, her visa, and her background, as though any detail might be used against her. When she tried to ask why she was being treated this way, one of the officers cut her off. He told her she had no right to ask questions and should be grateful they were even speaking to her. His words stung, but Maya remembered her father's advice and stayed calm. She wanted to argue, but she knew anger would only fuel their cruelty. As the questioning went on, the officers began to make comments that had nothing to do with her travel. Their words hinted at bias, and their tone carried a weight that made her skin crawl. They accused her of looking suspicious, of standing out among the passengers. They claimed she had behaved differently, though Maya knew she had done nothing unusual. She realized then that this had nothing to do with her actions. They had chosen her simply because of who she was. Her silence seemed to frustrate them. One of the officers slammed his hand on the table, making her flinch. He told her she would not leave until they found what they were looking for. But Maya knew there was nothing to find. She had nothing to hide. Still, the fear of being trapped in that room alone with them pressed down on her chest. Meanwhile, outside the room, the world was beginning to take notice. The videos recorded by travelers were already spreading online. People were posting comments, asking why a young woman had been handcuffed without reason. Some called for justice, others demanded answers from the police. Maya, unaware of this growing storm, sat quietly, holding on to her dignity. Back in the room, the officers finally unlocked her cuffs, but only so they could force her to empty her pockets and open her handbag. She rubbed her sore wrists, then complied. She placed her phone, wallet, and small notebook on the table. The officers checked everything, flipping through the notebook, scrolling through her phone without asking permission. Maya wanted to protest, but she bit her tongue. She feared that any resistance would be twisted into a reason for them to keep her longer. Her eyes watered as they scrolled through personal photos of her family. She thought of her mother, who might be standing at the arrival gate right now, confused and worried because she had not shown up. She thought of her younger brother, who might be asking where she was. The thought made her chest ache, but she did not let the tears fall. The officers eventually grew bored of her belongings, having found nothing unusual. But instead of admitting their mistake, they doubled down. They accused her of hiding something, of being clever enough to trick them. They said she would stay until they uncovered the truth. Maya sat still, her eyes fixed on the table. Her calm silence made them uneasy, as though her lack of fear was an act of defiance. One of them leaned close and whispered that no one would believe her if she complained. He said people like her were always suspected and rarely listened to. His words were meant to break her spirit, but Maya's heart refused to give in. She remembered her grandfather, a man of honor who had always stood for justice. His memory gave her strength. She told herself she would survive this moment, no matter how dark it felt. Outside the room, the sound of voices began to rise. The officers paused, hearing the faint noise through the walls. A small crowd had gathered near the door. Reporters were starting to arrive, drawn by the viral videos. The officers glanced at each other nervously. They knew the situation was slipping out of their control. Inside, however, Maya still had no idea of the growing support forming around her. She only knew that she was tired, humiliated, and aching to see her family. Every minute felt like an hour. The officers whispered again, their frustration clear. They had failed to find any evidence, yet they were unwilling to admit their mistake. Their pride kept them from backing down. Maya closed her eyes for a moment and prayed silently. She asked for strength, for patience, and for the truth to shine through. She told herself she was not alone, even if it felt that way. She trusted that somehow, justice would find its way into this room. The officers demanded she sign a paper admitting she had been suspicious. Maya looked at the document, her lips pressed tightly together. She refused. Her refusal seemed to shock them. They raised their voices, trying to scare her into agreeing, but she shook her head. No matter how afraid she felt, she would not sign a lie. The tension in the room grew heavy. The officers were losing control, and Maya's quiet courage only made their anger worse. They threatened her with consequences, but she sat firm, her voice steady when she finally spoke. She said she had done nothing wrong and she would not admit to something she did not do. Her words hung in the air, quiet but powerful. The officers stared at her, frustrated and unsettled. For the first time, it was clear that their power over her was not as strong as they thought. Outside, the sound of voices grew louder. Reporters were knocking on the door, demanding to know what was happening. The officers exchanged nervous glances again. They knew they could not hide this much longer, and so part 2 ended with Maya still in that small room, her dignity intact despite the insults, her courage shining despite the fear. The officers, once confident in their control, now faced the growing storm outside. They had no idea that their actions, meant to humiliate one young woman, were about to turn against them in ways they could not escape. Maya sat in the cold room with her belongings scattered on the table. The officers whispered to each other, unsure what to do next. They had searched everything, questioned her again and again, and tried to force her into signing papers, but she had refused. Her quiet strength unsettled them. They had expected fear, tears, or complete surrender. But instead she sat calmly, her face steady even though her heart was beating fast. Outside that room, the world was beginning to move quickly. The videos taken by travelers had spread across social media platforms within hours. Strangers who had never met Maya were sharing the clips, adding angry comments and demanding answers. The images of her being handcuffed for no clear reason had struck a nerve. People began tagging news channels, civil rights groups, and government officials. The story grew louder by the minute. and the airport was turning into the center of attention. In her home, Maya's family was still waiting near the arrival gate. At first, they thought there had been a delay, but as time passed and she did not appear, worry grew heavier on their hearts. Her mother's face turned pale with fear, and her brother kept asking where she was. Then a stranger, who had filmed the scene on his phone, walked up to them. He showed them the video and asked if the young woman in the clip was their daughter. The moment her mother saw the image of Maya in handcuffs, her knees almost gave way. Her father's jaw tightened as he struggled to control his rising anger. Her father immediately called a family friend, a lawyer who had once worked closely with Maya's late grandfather. That lawyer, Mr. Rahman, was not just experienced, he was respected. He had fought many difficult cases and never bowed to pressure. When he heard what had happened, he dropped everything and drove straight to the airport. Meanwhile, journalists began to arrive. They had seen the trending videos and smelled a story that could not be ignored. With cameras in hand, they pushed through the crowd asking questions about the young woman. Some travelers who had witnessed the arrest gave statements. One woman told reporters she had seen Maya walking peacefully with her suitcase before being stopped. Another said the officers had treated her roughly without any explanation. Their words added fire to the growing storm. Inside the room, the officers were unaware of how quickly the world outside was changing. They thought they still had control. One of them told Maya that she might not be allowed to leave for a long time. His voice carried the threat of endless trouble. Maya, tired but calm, looked him straight in the eye and said softly, "I have done nothing wrong. The truth will come out." Her words, though simple, carried a weight that made both officers uncomfortable. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. One of the officers opened it slightly, and a man in a suit stepped in. It was Mr. Rahman, the lawyer. His presence filled the room with authority. He carried himself with calm confidence, his eyes sharp as they landed on Maya in the chair. He asked immediately why she was being detained. The officers looked uneasy, not expecting such a direct challenge. Mr. Rahman introduced himself formally and demanded to see the charges. The officers muttered excuses, saying she looked suspicious, that they were still investigating. But the lawyer cut them off. He told them there was no legal ground for keeping someone in handcuffs without proof of a crime. He reminded them that every citizen had rights, and those rights could not be trampled by arrogance or prejudice. His voice was firm and his words carried the weight of the law. Maya's heart lifted at the sight of him. For the first time since her arrest, she felt hope. She sat straighter in her chair, her courage renewed. The officers, however, grew nervous. They knew this was no ordinary lawyer. Mr. Rahman had a reputation, and they could sense his determination. Outside, the journalists had gathered near the security section. They shouted questions, trying to capture every detail. Security staff tried to push them back, but the reporters refused to leave. News channels were already broadcasting live updates. Viewers at home saw the images of the growing crowd, the tension, and the mystery surrounding the young woman's detention. Soon, government officials began making phone calls, asking what was happening at the airport. Civil rights organizations released statements demanding Maya's release. The officers inside the room had no idea that their actions had become a national conversation. Their faces were already appearing on television screens across the country, replayed again and again from the shaky phone footage. As Mr. Rahman spoke with authority, the officers' confidence crumbled. They insisted they were only doing their job, but their voices lacked strength. The lawyer warned them that every second of this unlawful detention was being recorded, not just by cameras outside, but also in official complaints he would soon file. He told them that their careers and freedom were now at risk if they continued down this path. Maya listened, her heart swelling with quiet pride. She thought of her grandfather, who had once fought for justice in a courtroom. She felt as though his spirit was present in that moment, standing beside her through the words of Mr. Rahman. The officers exchanged worried glances. They had expected an easy case, an isolated young woman who could be intimidated into silence. But now they were facing a respected lawyer, a growing media storm, and the weight of public opinion. Their arrogance began to fade into fear. Outside, chants began to rise from the crowd. People shouted for justice, for Maya's release, and for accountability. The voices grew louder, echoing through the terminal. Reporters captured every moment, broadcasting it live. What had started as a quiet humiliation was now a loud demand for truth. Maya finally spoke again, her voice clear. She told the lawyer she had nothing to hide, that they had searched everything and found nothing. Mr. Rahman nodded, then turned to the officers and told them it was over. They had no legal reason to keep her, and if they did not release her immediately, they would face charges themselves. The officers hesitated, their pride clashing with their fear. But the sound of voices outside, the flashes of cameras, and the lawyer's unwavering gaze left them no choice. Slowly, they removed the cuffs from Maya's wrists. The metal clicked open and her hands were free again. She rubbed her sore skin, but her face held a quiet strength that no one could deny. The lawyer guided her out of the room, and the door swung open to the noise of the crowd. The moment Maya stepped out, cameras flashed, microphones were pushed forward, and voices shouted questions. She blinked against the sudden brightness, but her face stayed calm. Behind her, the officers tried to hide their discomfort as reporters turned their cameras on them. Maya's family rushed forward, tears streaming as they hugged her tightly. Her mother's arms wrapped around her as if to shield her from the world. Her father shook Mr. Rahman's hand firmly, gratitude shining in his eyes. Her brother clung to her side, refusing to let go. The airport was filled with noise, but in that moment Maya felt peace. She was free and she was not alone. She did not yet know that this was only the beginning, that the fight for justice would soon move from the airport to the courtroom. But for now she stood surrounded by love, courage, and the support of strangers who had refused to look away. The days after Maya's release were filled with noise, headlines, and rising voices from every corner of the country. Her arrest had become more than a single event. It had become a symbol. News channels replayed the videos again and again, showing her being handcuffed at the airport for no reason. Civil rights groups rallied in her defense, and social media users flooded timelines with her story. Everywhere she looked, her name was being spoken, and while she had never wanted such attention, she realized it carried a weight she could not ignore. Mr. Rahman, the lawyer who had stepped into that airport room like a shield, wasted no time. The very next morning, he filed a case against the two officers and their department. The charges were serious: unlawful detention, abuse of power, violation of civil rights, and misconduct. He also demanded a full review of the officers' past actions, certain that this was not the first time they had targeted innocent people. Maya sat quietly in his office as he explained the steps ahead. She listened carefully, her hands folded in her lap. Though her body was still tired from the stress, her spirit was steady. She told him she did not want revenge, she wanted truth. She wanted no one else to go through what she had endured. Mr. Rahman nodded, respecting her resolve. The investigation began. Reporters kept digging, uncovering old complaints against the same officers. Several citizens came forward, sharing stories of being stopped unfairly or treated harshly by the very men who had arrested Maya. Their voices, once ignored, were now being recorded, written down, and broadcast for everyone to hear. The more people spoke, the more patterns appeared, and the evidence of discrimination became impossible to deny. At the same time, the airport cameras were reviewed. Clear footage showed Maya walking peacefully with her bag before being stopped. Another angle showed the moment she was handcuffed without any attempt at explanation. These videos, played alongside the phone clips from travelers, created a timeline of truth that no excuse could erase. The officers, once proud and confident, now found themselves cornered. Their names were printed in newspapers, their faces broadcast on television. Neighbors whispered about them, colleagues avoided them, and their department, once ready to protect them, began to distance itself. Internal Affairs launched its own review, and even fellow officers spoke quietly of their history of arrogance and prejudice. The first court hearing drew crowds. Reporters filled the seats, cameras lined the steps outside, and supporters gathered with signs demanding justice. Maya arrived with her parents and Mr. Rahman by her side. She wore simple clothes, her face calm but serious. She was not there for attention. She was there to stand for truth. As she walked through the crowd, people clapped softly, some calling her brave. The support gave her strength, though she still carried the weight of humiliation inside. Inside the courtroom, the officers sat stiffly, their lawyers beside them. They avoided Maya's eyes, their faces tight with unease. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. The case was called, and Mr. Rahman rose to speak. His voice was steady, filled with conviction. He laid out the facts clearly. Maya had been arrested without cause, handcuffed in public, searched without reason, and humiliated in front of strangers. He presented the videos, the witness statements, and the records of past complaints. Each piece of evidence was like a stone, building a wall that trapped the officers inside their own wrongdoing. The officers' lawyers tried to argue. They claimed the arrest was part of standard procedure, that Maya had looked nervous, that they had only been doing their job. But when the judge asked for proof of suspicious behavior, they had none. The videos showed the opposite, Maya calm, polite, and cooperative. The judge's eyes narrowed as he reviewed the footage, clearly unimpressed by the weak defense. Witnesses were called. Travelers who had been at the airport testified. One woman said she saw Maya treated roughly for no reason. Another man explained that he had filmed the arrest because it seemed unjust from the beginning. Their voices were steady, their words honest. Each testimony added another crack in the officer's defense. Then Maya was called to the stand. She walked slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she placed them on the wooden railing. The courtroom waited in silence. She began to speak, her voice soft but clear. She described every detail. The moment she was stopped, the cold metal of the cuffs, the humiliation of being watched by strangers, the harsh words she endured, and the quiet strength she tried to hold on to. She did not exaggerate, did not add anger to her story, she simply told the truth. Her words touched everyone in the room. Even reporters who had covered countless cases found themselves moved by her dignity. The officers shifted uncomfortably as she spoke. They could not look at her. Their arrogance had melted into shame, though they still tried to hide it behind blank expressions. When Mr. Rahman questioned her, he asked only simple things. Did she resist? No, she had not. Did she argue? No, she had remained calm. Did they ever explain why they arrested her? No, they never did. Each answer was another nail in the coffin of their defense. By the time Maya stepped down, the atmosphere in the courtroom had changed. The balance of power had shifted. The young woman they had tried to humiliate now stood taller than them, her voice stronger than their excuses. As the hearings continued, more evidence came forward. Internal affairs revealed records of complaints against the same officers, some buried, some dismissed without reason. Now, in the light of Maya's case, those old files took on new meaning. The pattern was clear. These officers had abused their power again and again, and Maya's case was the one that finally exposed them. Public support grew even louder. People held rallies outside the courthouse, chanting for justice. Civil rights leaders spoke about Maya's courage, calling her a symbol of resistance. For Maya, it was overwhelming. But she reminded herself that this fight was bigger than her. She thought of the strangers who had recorded her arrest, the witnesses who had spoken, and the lawyer who had stood beside her. She realized she was no longer just one voice. She was part of a chorus demanding change. In the final arguments, Mr. Rahman stood before the judge in the crowded courtroom. He spoke of dignity, of fairness, of the promise that every person should be safe from abuse of power. He reminded the court that law was meant to protect, not humiliate. His words were simple yet powerful, and they rang through the room with undeniable truth. The officers' lawyers tried one last time to defend them, but their words sounded empty. They could not fight against the clear evidence, the videos, the witnesses, and Maya's quiet strength. The truth was too heavy to deny. As the judge prepared to deliver the decision, silence filled the courtroom. Maya sat with her family, her hands folded, her heart pounding. The officers sat stiffly, their faces pale. Everyone in the room knew that the moment of reckoning was close. The courtroom was silent as the judge reviewed the evidence one last time. Every eye in the room was fixed on him, waiting for the words that would decide the fate of the two officers. Maya sat between her parents, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She tried to steady her breathing, but her heart raced. After all the humiliation, after all the pain, this was the moment she had been waiting for. The judge began to speak slowly, his voice carrying through the room with authority. He said the evidence was clear. He described how the videos showed Maya walking calmly, how the officers had handcuffed her without cause, and how they had treated her with cruelty instead of professionalism. He said their defense had been weak, filled with excuses rather than proof. He spoke of their history of misconduct, the buried complaints, and the repeated abuse of power that had finally come to light. Then his voice grew firm. He declared the officers guilty of unlawful detention, abuse of authority, and violation of civil rights. The words seemed to echo in the room, striking every heart present. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, relief washing over her. Her parents held her hands tightly, tears glistening in her mother's eyes. But the judge was not finished. He continued, saying the law could not allow such behavior to go unpunished. He explained that when those entrusted with authority misuse it, they betray not only one person but the entire system of justice. Finally, he announced their sentence: years in prison, removal from the police force, and a permanent record of their crimes. Gasps filled the room. Some people even clapped softly, though the bailiff quickly hushed them. The officers sat frozen, their faces pale, the weight of their downfall heavy on their shoulders. Maya looked at them, not with hatred but with quiet strength. She did not smile, nor did she show anger. She simply sat with dignity, knowing that the truth had spoken louder than their cruelty. They had once dragged her in handcuffs, but now they were the ones led away in chains. As the guards took them from the courtroom, Maya saw the fear in their eyes, the very fear they had once tried to place in her heart. Outside, the news spread like fire. Reporters rushed to broadcast the verdict, and crowds cheered when they heard. Social media exploded with messages of support, calling Maya a symbol of courage and resilience. People wrote that justice had finally been served, that the system had listened, and that her bravery had made it possible. When Maya stepped out of the courthouse, the crowd erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, microphones were pushed toward her, and voices called out for a statement. She paused, her lawyer by her side, her family behind her. She spoke softly but firmly. She said she had never wanted fame, never wanted attention, but she could not stay silent when injustice tried to silence her. She thanked the strangers who had recorded her arrest, the witnesses who had spoken, and the lawyer who had fought for her. She said this was not just her victory, but the victory of everyone who believed in fairness. Her words were simple, but they touched every listener. Her mother hugged her tightly, whispering that she was proud. Her father placed a hand on her shoulder, his eyes shining with quiet pride. Her younger brother clung to her arm, smiling through his tears. For them, this was not only justice, it was the return of their daughter and sister stronger than ever before. In the days that followed, Maya's story continued to spread. Newspapers published articles about her courage. Television channels aired interviews, and organizations invited her to speak. Though she was naturally quiet and private, she agreed to share her experience, believing it might inspire others. She spoke about dignity, about standing firm, about the importance of truth even when fear feels overwhelming. She told young people not to be silent if they faced injustice, reminding them that one voice can spark many. Her case also led to real change. The police department announced reforms, promising stricter reviews of officer behavior and better training against discrimination. Civil rights groups used her story as an example of why accountability matters. Laws were proposed to strengthen protections against abuse of power. Maya had wanted only to clear her name, but her courage had opened doors for broader justice. She also received countless letters and messages from strangers. Some were from people who had faced similar treatment, but had stayed silent out of fear. They thanked her for speaking up, saying her bravery gave them hope. Others were from young students who admired her calmness, saying they wanted to be as strong as her. Each message touched her heart, reminding her that her pain had not been in vain. Despite all the attention, Maya tried to return to a normal life. She went back to her studies, spent time with her family, and enjoyed the small moments she had missed during her years abroad. Yet she knew she was no longer the same person. The experience had tested her deeply, but it had also shaped her into someone stronger, someone who understood the power of resilience. One evening, as she sat with her family in the garden, her father looked at her and said, "You carried yourself with dignity when others tried to take it from you. You turned your pain into strength. That is something no one can ever take away." His words stayed with her, a reminder of how far she had come. Maya often thought back to the airport, to the moment she felt the cold cuffs on her wrists. She remembered the humiliation, the fear, and the helplessness. But now, when she thought of that moment, she also remembered what followed. The voices that rose for her, the lawyer who defended her, the crowd that stood by her side, and the justice that was finally served. What had begun as a nightmare had become a story of strength, truth, and triumph. And so her story spread not as one of victimhood, but as one of victory. The officers who had tried to humiliate her ended up behind bars while Maya walked free, her head held high. Her courage proved that even in the darkest moments, dignity and truth can shine brighter than cruelty and fear. For many, she became more than just a name in the news. She became a reminder that justice is possible, that silence can be broken, and that one person's strength can inspire thousands. For Maya, she simply carried on, living her life with quiet grace, knowing that her story had left a mark not only on her own life, but on the lives of countless others who now believed that change was possible.